You're watching Southern Crimes.
Fort Bragg, North Carolina, February 17th, 1970. A military police officer responds to a frantic emergency call.
Help! 544 Castle Drive. Stabbing.
The voice on the line is barely audible before the connection cuts out. Within minutes, MPs arrive at the address, finding the front door locked and the house dark. Circling to the back, they discover an unlocked screen door. What awaits them inside will haunt the American consciousness for decades to come. In the master bedroom, they find 26-year-old Colette MacDonald lying on her back, brutally beaten and stabbed. Her pajama top is torn and bloodied. Nearby, her husband, Army Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, is found wounded but alive, his head resting on her chest.
Protect my kids. I heard them crying.
The officers move deeper into the house, where they discover both children had suffered fatal injuries. 5-year-old Kimberley MacDonald and 2-year-old Kristen were found in their respective bedrooms, both victims of severe trauma from multiple weapons. On the headboard of the master bedroom, written in blood, is a single word: pig. What happened in this modest military home? Was this the work of drug-crazed hippies, as Jeffrey MacDonald would later claim? Or was the perfect family man hiding something far more sinister? This is the story of the Fort Bragg family murders, a case that would captivate the nation, spawn decades of legal battles, and forever change how America viewed the sanctity of the family home. This is Southern Crimes. Before the night that would define his life, Jeffrey MacDonald seemed to embody the American dream. Born in Queens, New York in 1943, he was the golden boy of his high school, student council president, prom king, voted most popular, and most likely to succeed. In the 8th grade, he met Colette Stevenson, beginning a relationship that would eventually lead to marriage after she became pregnant during his sophomore year at Princeton. Their daughter Kimberley was born in April 1964, followed by Kristen in May 1967. MacDonald's path seemed charmed. He graduated from Princeton, attended Northwestern University Medical School, and in 1969 joined the Army. His assignment to the elite Green Berets as a physician was a capstone to an already impressive resume. MacDonald embodied the all-American success story. His handsome good looks, sharp intelligence, and impressive accomplishments made him the kind of man people naturally trusted and admired. By early 1970, the MacDonalds were living in officers' quarters at Fort Bragg. Colette was 5 months pregnant with their third child, a boy. Christmas photos showed a smiling family, the picture of domestic bliss. But beneath the exterior, evidence of mounting domestic tension was beginning to surface. Jeffrey was working long hours, moonlighting at a civilian hospital in addition to his military duties. He'd begun taking Escatrol, a now banned diet pill containing amphetamines. Friends later reported that his personality had become increasingly erratic. Colette confided to friends that she was concerned about changes in her husband's behavior. She wrote to her mother about feeling isolated at Fort Bragg, though she maintained that she was happy in her marriage. No one could have predicted that this seemingly perfect family was about to be shattered forever. According to Jeffrey MacDonald, the nightmare began shortly after 2 a.m. on February 17, 1970. He claimed he'd fallen asleep on the living room couch after finding his daughter Kristen had wet his side of the bed. He was awakened by his wife's screams and Kimberly crying,
"Daddy, why are you hurting Mommy?"
As he struggled to his feet, MacDonald said he was confronted by 4 intruders. 3 men and a woman with long blonde hair wearing a floppy hat and boots holding a candle. The men attacked him with a club and ice pick, while the woman engaged in a bizarre chant.
"Acid is groovy. Kill the pigs."
MacDonald told investigators he fought the assailants but was overpowered. His pajama top was pulled over his head and used to restrain him. He lost consciousness during the struggle. When he awoke, the intruders were gone. He found his family brutally murdered, attempted CPR on each of them, and then called for help before collapsing from his own injuries. It was a horrifying story that seemed to echo the Manson family murders that had occurred just 6 months earlier in California. The word pig written in blood, the drug-crazed hippies, the parallels were unmistakable. But as investigators processed the scene, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. The physical evidence painted a far different picture from MacDonald's account. The living room, where he claimed to have fought multiple attackers in a life-or-death struggle, showed remarkably little disruption. Only a tipped-over coffee table and an overturned flower pot were out of place. Even more damning was the blood evidence. Each family member had a different blood type, allowing investigators to track movement throughout the house. The blood pattern suggested a very different sequence of events than what MacDonald had described. And then there were MacDonald's injuries, superficial cuts and bruises, plus a single stab wound to the chest that partially collapsed his lung. Compared to the savage attacks on his wife and daughters, his wounds seemed almost surgical in their precision. As the sun rose over Fort Bragg that February morning, investigators were already beginning to suspect that the horror that had visited 544 Castle Drive had come not from outside intruders, but from within. The case against Jeffrey MacDonald would ultimately be built on forensic evidence, tiny fibers, blood spatter patterns, and the careful analysis of the crime scene that told a very different story from his account. Blue pajama threads from MacDonald's torn top were found in all 3 bedrooms, including under Colette's body and beneath Kristen's fingernails, places they shouldn't have been if his pajama top had been torn during a struggle in the living room. The blood evidence was equally damning. Colette's blood was found in Kristen's bedroom, suggesting she'd gone there to protect her daughter. Kimberly's blood was found in the master bedroom doorway, indicating she'd been attacked there before being carried back to her own bed. Perhaps most telling was the lack of evidence supporting MacDonald's story. No fibers from the alleged intruders were found, no muddy footprints despite a rainy night. No blood on the telephone MacDonald claimed to have used immediately after checking on his family. Investigators theorized that the argument began in the master bedroom, possibly over Kristen wetting the bed. Colette was attacked first. Kimberly, awakened by the noise, appeared in the doorway and was struck, possibly accidentally. MacDonald then carried her back to her bed and stabbed her to ensure she wouldn't survive as a witness. Colette, not yet dead, had struggled to Kristen's room in an attempt to protect her youngest child. MacDonald followed, killing both of them before returning Colette's body to the master bedroom. The final act in his grim performance was the staging, writing "pig" on the headboard, creating superficial wounds on himself, and placing the weapons outside the house before calling for help. An investigator stated it bluntly.
It was methodical, each step calculated to support his story of hippie intruders.
On April 6, 1970, the Army Criminal Investigation Division formally named Jeffrey MacDonald as their prime suspect in the murders of his family. For Colette MacDonald's stepfather, Alan Kassab, the revelation that Jeffrey might be responsible for the murders was unthinkable. Initially, he was MacDonald's most vocal defender, convinced of his son-in-law's innocence.
If I ever had another daughter, I'd want her to marry the same man.
But his support began to waver after watching MacDonald's appearance on the Dick Cavett Show in December 1970. Rather than appearing as a grieving husband and father, MacDonald seemed detached, even jovial at times, focusing more on criticizing the Army's investigation than on the loss of his family. Kassab's suspicions deepened when he finally obtained a copy of the Article 32 hearing transcript. After meticulously studying the evidence, he became convinced that MacDonald had murdered his stepdaughter and grandchildren. Journalist Joe McGinnis, who would later write the best-selling book Fatal Vision, made the following observation.
It was a complete reversal. Kassab went from being MacDonald's strongest advocate to his most determined adversary.
What followed was a legal odyssey spanning decades. The Army's Article 32 hearing in 1970 recommended dismissing the charges against MacDonald due to insufficient evidence. He received an honorable discharge and moved to California, where he resumed his medical career. But Kassab refused to let the case die. He petitioned the Justice Department to reopen the investigation, and in 1974, a grand jury was convened. After hearing testimony from over 100 witnesses, they indicted MacDonald on 3 counts of murder in January 1975. What followed was a series of legal maneuvers that would keep the case in limbo for years. MacDonald's attorneys argued that his right to a speedy trial had been violated, and in 1976, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed, dismissing the indictment. The government then appealed to the Supreme Court, which ruled in 1978 that the case could proceed. Finally, in July 1979, 9 years after the murders, Jeffrey MacDonald stood trial in federal court. The trial of Jeffrey MacDonald lasted 5 weeks, captivating the nation with its gruesome details and the spectacle of a once-respected doctor fighting for his life. Prosecutors methodically presented the forensic evidence, demonstrating how the physical facts contradicted MacDonald's account. FBI analysis showed how the 48 ice pick holes in MacDonald's pajama top could be aligned with the 21 wounds in Colette's chest when the garment was folded in a specific way. This suggested the pajama top had been placed on her body before she was stabbed, not torn during a struggle as MacDonald claimed. The defense countered by highlighting errors in the investigation and bringing forward Helena Stokely, a drug-addicted woman who'd allegedly confessed to being present during the murders. However, on the stand, Stokely denied any involvement. MacDonald himself testified, maintaining his innocence and insisting that hippie intruders had killed his family. But under cross-examination, he struggled to explain the contradictions between his story and the physical evidence. After deliberating for just 6.5 hours, the jury returned their verdict on August 29, 1979, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Kristen and second-degree murder in the deaths of Colette and Kimberley. Judge Franklin Dupree sentenced MacDonald to 3 consecutive life terms. After years of MacDonald maintaining his innocence, the fact that 12 everyday citizens reached a decision so quickly suggested they found the evidence against him compelling and convincing. For Alfred Kassab, the verdict brought a measure of justice for his beloved stepdaughter and grandchildren.
This was something that had to be done. Now we can rest in peace.
But the legal battle was far from over. In the decades since his conviction, Jeffrey MacDonald has filed numerous appeals, each one rejected by the courts. DNA testing conducted in 2006 failed to exonerate him, instead confirming that a hair found under his daughter's fingernail belonged to him. Now, 81 years old, MacDonald continues to maintain his innocence from the Federal Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. In 2017, he stated,
if it takes me saying I killed my family to the parole commission to get out of here and go home, well, I'm never going home.
The case has spawned books, documentaries, and endless debate. Joe McGinnis's Fatal Vision portrayed MacDonald as a narcissistic sociopath, while Errol Morris's A Wilderness of Error questioned whether he received a fair trial. The case is especially haunting because it forces us to confront a disturbing reality that someone who appears entirely normal, a respected doctor, a devoted father, can still be capable of unimaginable darkness. It's this contrast between outward appearances and hidden truths that make the story so compelling. For the families left behind, the pain never truly fades. Colette's mother, Mildred Kassab, initially welcomed a diagnosis of breast cancer after the murders, writing in her diary that it would help her desire to just die. Though she eventually sought treatment, both she and Alfred Kassab died in 1994, having spent their final years fighting to keep their daughter's killer behind bars. The MacDonald case remains one of the most contested murder trials in American history, a reflection of its legal complexity and the unsettling questions it raises about truth and justice. So, as we move beyond the details of this case, we're left with a chilling thought. The greatest dangers don't always come from the outside. Sometimes they're already inside the home, wearing a uniform, sharing a bed, hiding in plain sight.